Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in this video, I wanted to talk about culture shock, specifically culture shock for Japanese people studying in the United States. So if you're Japanese and you're thinking about traveling or studying in the United States, this will be a fun video for you, okay? So I taught for almost 15 years at a Japanese university with a campus in Boston on the East Coast of the United States, Boston, Massachusetts, okay? And I heard so many different stories about culture shock from my students. They were coming from Saitama, they were coming from Chiba, Kanagawa, so many different prefectures, mostly around the Tokyo metropolitan area, and they were coming to study in Boston. And over 15 years, I had so many discussions with them about like what surprised them most about Boston, about American culture. What was your biggest culture shock coming to the United States? And here are the 5 main things that my students from Japan talked about in terms of culture shock in the United States, okay? So, number 1, customer service, okay? Without exception, my students complained about American customer service. I do think that the customer service in Japan is some of the best in the world. I had an opportunity to travel to Japan, and as soon as I got on the plane, this was Japan Airlines, I was blown away. I was amazed by the level of comfort, the level of attention to detail. The customer service was amazing. I also had a chance to go to a Starbucks in Shibuya. It was just incredible. The service there was so much better than the service at a Starbucks, for example, in New York or Boston. I do think there is an attention to detail in Japanese culture that maybe comes from Zen tradition, from Shintoism, I'm not sure. But there's a level of quality, a level of care, a level of attention to detail that is almost unsurpassed in this world. So the customer service in Japan is just unrivaled. It's amazing. So when my students came to Boston, they found the customer service to be lacking. All right, they were surprised. They said sometimes the clerks were on their iPhones. They weren't really into their jobs as much. I know in Japan, there's a saying that the customer is God. Okay, now we don't have that in the United States. There's so much more focus on individual value that we put ourselves first, right? We don't value the customer service experience quite as much as in Japan. Okay, so they did tell me that the customer service in Starbucks and Cheesecake Factory specifically was better than other places. But without a doubt, almost all my students told me that the customer service in Japan was much better than the customer service in Boston. So that's point number 1, okay? Point number 2, the traffic lights and the jaywalking, okay? My students were so surprised that American people did not pay attention to the traffic lights. They just walked whenever they wanted to. They ignored the light, whether you could walk or not, right? This is jaywalking, right? When you just walk, even though the light says don't walk. So my students were really surprised by this, that American people don't follow that simple law. Now, when I went to Tokyo, I was surprised by the opposite. I remember standing at a traffic light in Shibuya, and there was no traffic. There was no traffic. There were no cars coming for miles, but everybody was just standing there waiting to cross because the light said don't cross. So this to me suggests a deference to authority, a deference to tradition. Maybe this comes from Confucian values that inform a lot of East Asian culture. It's a respect for authority that American people don't have, right? If you know the song by Frank Sinatra, My Way, right? My Way, it's all about me. It's all about individualism. When Frank Sinatra sang that song, I think it was at Madison Square Garden, he introduced it as the national anthem of the United States, My Way. So I do think this is true. In American culture, there's a lot more focus on individualism, on me. I want to do things my way. I don't really care about authority. I don't want you to tell me what to do. And this crosses over. This translates into even following basic traffic laws. So American people, we kind of ignore a lot of the laws, right? Like the speed limit, it's just kind of a suggestion. The traffic lights, okay, if it says don't walk, a lot of us just walk, especially in New York and Boston. So I thought that was really interesting, that second point about traffic lights and jaywalking. Again, all my students would be surprised by this. Okay, number 3, my students said that people are friendly. They said they were much more friendly in Boston than in Tokyo, okay, even in Saitama and Chiba. Now, this really surprised me because as an American, right, most Americans don't think that people in Boston are super friendly. So, you know that movie from way back called Legally Blonde, right, where Elle Woods, she comes from Los Angeles and she comes to study at Harvard Law School. And I think she describes the people in Boston as kind of, I think she uses the word vile, okay? Not pleasant, not nice, okay? This is an American stereotype about the East Coast and the West Coast. And I think people in Boston don't have the best reputation for being so friendly. I think they're much more friendly in California. I think they're more friendly in the Midwest. I don't usually associate Boston with, super friendly people. But my students were so surprised that everybody in Boston was so friendly. So I was really surprised because I thought, oh my gosh, I always thought Japan so friendly. But no, the opposite was true. They were telling me that Boston was so much more friendly than Tokyo. So that to me surprised me as an American. I do think American people were very outgoing, we're very talkative, we're very casual, we can be very, very friendly, even if our customer service is not so nice, even if we're looking at our iPhones, while we serve at Starbucks, okay? So that's number 3. Number 4, the bathroom stalls. Okay, my students complained again and again about the bathroom stalls in the United States at the airports, at hotels, compared to the bathroom stalls in Japan. Okay, so I used a bathroom at the Narita airport, and I was impressed that the stalls are completely private. Okay, American bathroom stalls are not as private, and I do think this kind of touches on a larger point about privacy. Okay, I don't think there's the same standard of privacy in America as there is in Japan. For example, I was walking down the street, again, this was in Shibuya, actually Omotesando in Tokyo. I was walking down the street and I saw a man on his bicycle, a Japanese man, fall down on the floor, on the ground. He fell on the ground. I was really surprised as an American that nobody offered to help. Everybody just kind of ignored this man, okay? Contrast this with my experience. When I was living in New York, I was really tired one day and I wasn't really paying attention. I was walking down the street and I tripped and I fell. And I was really surprised. I was new to living in New York. This was my first year there. And I was surprised as an American because 4 or 5 New Yorkers, including one man, he was a businessman on his cell phone. He looked super busy. All of them, without exception, asked me, "Hey, are you okay? Are you doing? Do you need are you okay?" I was really impressed by that 4 or 5 super busy New Yorkers just asked me if I was okay when I tripped and fell. So I know there's a stereotype about New Yorkers that they're kind of tough, they're kind of jaded, but I have to say, if you have a problem in New York City, that's probably the best place to be. Of all the places I've lived in Boston, I've lived in Washington, D.C., I've lived near San Francisco, and I've lived in New York City. So I've had a good fortune to live in many major cities in the United States. Of all the cities I've lived, the safest city to me, where I felt the safest, was actually New York City, because at least in Manhattan, you're never alone. There's always somebody around. If you have a problem, there's 100 people around you at any given time. And yes, New Yorkers are tough. New Yorkers are fast. New Yorkers are busy. But New Yorkers, they will help you if you have a problem. Okay. Whereas in Tokyo, when this man fell on his bicycle, nobody helped him. So I asked my students about that. What's going on? Why was that? And a lot of my students pointed out that it wasn't so much that the people in Tokyo were kind of uncaring or apathetic or cruel about this man falling on his bicycle. It was more about a respect for privacy that Japanese people have for other people's business, where I don't think we have that, especially in New York. There's not a lot of privacy, right? You go into the coffee shop, you go into the grocery store, people just start talking to you. It's oh, you're from Japan. Where are you from? Or, oh, I like your shoes. Or, oh, is that coffee good? Where did you get that, right? And I like that. It's like this casual sort of, we're all in this together. It's certainly, you feel that vibe in New York City. Whereas in Japan, at least in Tokyo, it's more about I want to respect your privacy, okay? And I do think that's why my students were so surprised about the bathroom stalls. American bathroom stalls, they don't go all the way down to the ground, the door at least, so it doesn't give you as much of a zone of privacy. And I do think that speaks to the larger issue that there's more respect for privacy in Japan than there is in the United States, for better or worse, okay? The last point I wanted to make was about the restaurants, okay? There's a lot of different nuances that are so interesting about American and Japanese restaurants, from tipping culture, right? In the United States, you usually tip 15 to 20%, but also in the United States, we have a dedicated server for each table, right? You'll get a dedicated waiter or waitress who will be your server for that evening. So when I went to Tokyo, I traveled with a travel companion. He was from Japan, and so he introduced me to a lot of Japanese restaurants. I was surprised that we didn't have one dedicated server. It was like a whole team of people that served you. So I thought that was also really interesting in terms of American focus on kind of individualism. Our customer service is oriented very differently in terms of restaurants. So if you come to an American restaurant, yes, you can expect just one waiter or one waitress, and that person is your server for the evening. And it's actually considered a little tacky, a little bit rude, if you kind of flag down or ask a favor of a server, a waiter or waitress that's actually not designated for your table, because that kind of undermines, or it kind of disrespects the server that is designated for your table, okay? So I thought that was also a really interesting point. Anyways, there's so many. I have to do another video on this because there are so many interesting points that my students made about, how they were surprised coming to the United States, specifically coming to Boston, and the culture shock that they experienced as Japanese people. And for me, as the teacher, it was super interesting because I learned so much about my own culture, about American culture, and those ideas were reinforced when I had the opportunity to go to Japan. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. This is Carl with Active English. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys later. Thank you. Bye-bye.